Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where the White House appears to be shifting both its tone and its tactics in Minnesota, with the president acknowledging a need to, quote, de-escalate as the political fallout from the fatal shootings of 2 American citizens continues to grow. But even as the White House tries to turn down the temperature, the president today also warning Minneapolis mayor, quote, not to play with fire and to cooperate with the federal government. In an interview with Fox News yesterday, the president was asked about his decision to shake up the leadership of his team in Minnesota and replace Greg Bovino, whose aggressive tactics have made him a controversial figure. Here's what the president said.
You know, we have Tom Homan there now. We put him in there. He's great. And they met with the governor, the mayor, everybody else, and we're going to de-escalate a little bit. I don't think it's a pullback. It's a little bit of a change. Bovino's very good, but he's a pretty out there kind of a guy. And in some cases, that's good. Maybe it wasn't good here.
And we're learning new details about the moments surrounding the killing of Alex Preddy. NBC News has obtained a preliminary internal Customs and Border Protection report, which says 2 agents fired their guns during the confrontation and that during the scuffle, an agent shouted, quote, he's got a gun. But the report makes no mention that Preddy ever held or brandished that gun, as administration officials, including DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, have claimed. NBC News also learned that the 2 agents who fired shots at Preddy have now been put on leave. Meanwhile, a growing number of Republicans are voicing their frustration with the administration following the shooting.
And so when people watch that video and the government tells them, well, he was assaulting the police officers, nobody with any objectivity watches that video and believes that's what's happening.
Senator, do you have faith in Kristi Noem as DHS Secretary?
I've already made a statement on that.
Oh, I wasn't there for it?
Yeah, I have said that I've lost confidence in her.
Do you think that President Trump should remove her from the position? Do you think she should resign?
That's obviously up to the president. But I think we would be better served with new leadership of the department.
I think if Noem looks at her body of work, I could not be. If I were in her position, I can't think of any point of pride over the last year. She's got to make her own decision, or the president does. But she has taken this administration into the ground on an issue that we should own.
He just stepped down. Does she need to?
Stephen Miller is in the same boat. This guy, after doing the stupid comments he made about Greenland getting the president in a difficult circumstance, is one of the people that came out publicly and said that this guy was a terrorist before he had even talked with anybody on the ground. And that's clearly not the case now. So, I mean, it's just, I mean, Stephen Miller never fails to live up to my expectations of incompetence.
There was also a frightening moment during a town hall in Minneapolis last night when a man rushed towards Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and sprayed her with a substance as she was calling for Secretary Noem to step down. Take a look at what happened.
Noem must resign or face impeachment.
Congresswoman Omar did continue her town hall after the incident, and the man is now under arrest. President Trump, who has repeatedly publicly attacked Omar, telling NBC News that he hadn't seen the video and that, quote, she probably had herself sprayed knowing her. Joining me now is our terrific team of reporters. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins me from the White House, along with NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky on the ground in Minneapolis, NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona. Thanks to all of you for starting us off on another very busy news day. Monica, let me start with you. So we're hearing the president talk about the need to de-escalate. Take me inside your conversations inside the administration. Are we seeing a shift in strategy?
I think so, Kristen. I think all of these different moves taken together do amount to that, though it is a little too early to tell whether the actual tactics on the ground and what we're going to see perhaps play out in Minneapolis in the coming days will actually look very different. But certainly the message from the president and the administration is a different one, with a little bit of a softer tone at times, though you are still seeing administration officials say that the president plans to implement his tough immigration enforcement policy and plans, and that is why Tom Homan, the border czar, is going to be there. But the acknowledgement, the tacit acknowledgement of the president saying that we're going to de-escalate a little bit tells you everything you need to know, because he's acknowledging that whatever the administration was doing there had escalated things to a point that now they need to be brought down. So I think you are hearing from White House officials that they want to see if this can help ease tensions, and certainly the conversations that the president has been having with the governor of Minnesota and the mayor of Minneapolis, that tells you, too, that they're trying to do this, even though some of the rhetoric is still pretty heated from the administration. Kristen.
Yeah, absolutely, Monica. And, you know, it's interesting in talking to some of my sources, they point to the fact that this is a president who understands the power of television. How have these images, Monica, and these optics played into this shift that you're tracking?
He really understands the optics, and he was all weekend essentially watching those images play out after the death of Alex Preddy, and he was following this along and really eventually grew quite disturbed, we're told, by a senior administration official, and that's when he knew he needed to make a change, and that's how you saw eventually the new leadership structure that was announced and the eventual departure of Gregory Bovino of the CBP. Again, they're still going to carry out, federal agents will still be carrying out what the president wants to see when it comes to these broader immigration goals. But I do think it is a bit of a different way, and the president doesn't want to see those scenes repeated, we were told by this official, and he doesn't like to, quote, see chaos unfold on his watch. Kristen.
And against that backdrop, Monica, the finger pointing has begun. What do you know about that?
Yeah, and this is something that is a little bit more reminiscent of the first Trump term, where we did see this repeatedly, different factions emerging with contrasting narratives of who's up and who's down and who really could be to blame here. Something that was extremely notable last night was the fact that you had White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller out with his own statement on the record, essentially saying that he believes that CBP may have not followed some kind of protocol that he talked about, saying that they are reviewing that, but we are unclear on what this new protocol is. He also said that that initial statement from DHS, the one that came out just after Alex Preddy was killed, was based on reports from CBP on the ground. Remember, of course, it was Stephen Miller who had called him a domestic terrorist and a would-be assassin. But also in this statement, he refers to the fact that he believes there should have been a physical barrier between the arrest teams and the disruptors. And again, that's what they say they are now looking at. And that is what raises a lot of questions, Kristen, because he indicated this was a new White House guideline that went out, but it's unclear to whom that went out. And again, the fact that Stephen Miller is essentially putting the blame elsewhere, with officials at DHS saying that they were also getting chaotic reports from on the ground, tells you that there just simply are competing elements here of different people that the president says are very important to his policy operation. And he has stood by, and the White House has stood by for now, Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem at this time.
All right, Monica Alba, starting us off, thank you so much for your great reporting, as always, on this developing story, Monica. Really appreciate it. Morgan, let me go to you in Minneapolis. I want to get your perspective on the ground there. What are local officials saying about President Trump's call to de-escalate? Is there a sense that things are de-escalating?
Yes and no, Kristen, and it's been an interesting 24 hours to follow, because yesterday we see this changing of the guard of sorts. Border Czar Tom Homan arriving, the departure of Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino, and then we hear from Governor Tim Walz, from Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, saying that they did both meet with Homan in person and that those conversations were productive. Both Walz and Frey said that there needed to be an ongoing dialogue. But what's interesting today, Kristen, is that here we have federal officials saying that, yes, a number of federal agents will be departing Minneapolis as early as yesterday. But I had a chance to meet with the governor this morning when he came here to this memorial to pay his respects to Alex Preddy. I asked him about that very thing. Take a listen.
Right. Spoke to the president and then heard him say how good a job Kristi Noem's doing. And then a statement that really took me back was the president said he himself will oversee investigations. That is so wrong on so many levels, and it's the last thing that we want.
Governor, are you aware that any agents have actually left this city?
No, I have not been. I have no evidence they have.
So, Kristen, while we've been told that Commander Greg Bovino is headed back to California where he will be resuming his old job, the question over whether or not ICE agents, other federal agents, will be leaving Minneapolis still very much up in the air. Residents here I've spoken to say they're hearing the words, but they're certainly waiting to see tangible proof. And I think that counts for the governor as well.
Absolutely. Great job tracking him down, Morgan, and getting those questions to him. Let me ask you about another development there. There are reports that federal agents tried to enter the Ecuadorian consulate in Minneapolis yesterday. What more are you learning about that?
Yeah, videos captured an ICE agent trying to enter the premises there. He was kept outside by one of the employees inside the consulate. We know that the country of Ecuador released a statement to the U.S. Embassy there saying this type of action cannot be repeated again. Kristen.
All right, Morgan Chesky on the ground there in a frigid Minneapolis. We appreciate your reporting and your interview with the governor. Thanks so much, Morgan. Julia, let me turn to you. So let's start with one of the big developments today, which is that the two agents involved in this shooting have now been put on leave. What do you know about that?
Well, that is what is supposed to happen. In fact, that's what was unusual when the ICE officer involved in the Renee Nicole Good shooting was not put on leave. They said he was taking time with his family, but that appeared to be voluntary. As you see throughout federal agencies and usually with local law enforcement, there's leave after a fatal shooting, no matter who's to blame, so they can conduct an investigation. It's also so that if an officer has been involved with killing someone, they likely need time off before they're put back on the beat. They're just not mentally ready to go back to that. It does not mean that this is a disciplinary action. It's more that they've identified that there were two officers and they've been put on leave. If there is a disciplinary action, they could likely be put on unpaid leave or suspended entirely. But that decision would come from the Office of Professional Responsibility within CBP.
And all of this taking place with an investigation underway. You heard President Trump say that he wants to oversee it. Governor Walz responding, saying that he believes that's wrong on so many levels. What is the status of this investigation, and are state and local officials involved in any capacity at this point?
You know, we did hear a statement yesterday from Governor Walz after his meeting with Tom Homan that he wants his Department of Public Safety to be working with the government. But that doesn't mean that they've been given all access. You know, that really has to do more with the protests that are currently on the ground. As we understand it, this still lies within the Department of Homeland Security, and that if they get enough information, they could refer it to the Justice Department for a criminal investigation. But so far, according to our reporting or any public reporting that's out there, that referral has not been made yet. And that's key, because typically it would start with the Justice Department. They would never speak to the White House or the agency responsible for this. They would be conducting the investigation. They would be talking to people like the bystanders who have said they haven't been contacted yet. And we would expect that investigation to take some time and not to have people jumping to conclusions so early.
And let me just get what you'll be watching for with Tom Homan now on the ground there.
You know, I think there could be a change. I don't want to be too quick to jump to it. But the thing that I've always taken away from my conversations with Tom Homan is that he really believes in two things. One is that sanctuary cities should not exist, so that places like Minneapolis need to cooperate with ICE, but also that the first priority needs to be going after criminals. That means someone's name on a piece of paper. That does not mean going up to people at a gas station and asking for their papers. And that's what we saw under Greg Bovino. So there could be a real change here, but I don't think he's going to back down on this insistence that they get cooperation from Minnesota. And it doesn't look like the governor's budging there either. So a lot to watch.
Yet another standoff. All right, Julia, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Let me turn to Melanie Zanona now on Capitol Hill. Mel, talk a little bit about the backlash that you are tracking there, particularly this growing opposition to funding Homeland Security. Government set to shut down on Friday. Where do you see this going?
Well, it does appear to be headed in the direction of a shutdown at this moment. But I will tell you, there are lawmakers in both parties who are trying to find an off-ramp here. Democrats did huddle for their lunches today behind closed doors, where they came up with a list of demands that they want to see in this DHS funding bill fight. And the three things they are asking for: number one, ending roving patrols. Those are those sweeping immigration checks. Number two, applying the same use of force standards that are applied to state and local police. And number three, prohibiting masks, as well as requiring body cameras for ICE agents. Meanwhile, on the Senate floor right now, you have Minnesota Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar speaking about the tragedy in Minnesota. The question, though, is whether Republicans are going to be willing to play ball. They have already rejected some of those ideas. But Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent did tell our Julie Sirkin today that Trump appears to be at least a little bit more engaged in this process than he did in the last shutdown fight. Let's watch some of their conversation.
Again, the government shutdown hurt the economy. It was the longest shutdown in history. So I don't believe that we have to shut down. I don't believe that we should shut down. But it's always an economic hit. Some of it gets pushed forward. We will see some of the shutdown, the economic growth appear in the first quarter, but then there's some that's lost forever, especially in the service economy.
So do you anticipate a shutdown? Do you think the administration will make a deal with Democrats on the Hill?
I know the president's been in contact with Republican leadership. He's been in contact with some of the Democratic leadership, so we'll see. The president is trying to prevent the shutdown. We've got a great economy.
But time is running out to come together on a deal, and if they don't, that means a significant portion of the federal government is set to shut down at midnight on Friday.
Just extraordinary to think that could happen after the longest government shutdown in history. Mel, let me turn to this attack on Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. The video is absolutely terrifying. The president now falsely saying she staged the incident. What's the latest there?
Well, there's been mixed reaction here on Capitol Hill. Democrats and even some Republicans did come out and swiftly condemn this attack. That includes firebrand Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who even acknowledged she vehemently disagrees with most of what Ilhan Omar says and stands for. But she also said no one deserves to be physically attacked. That is not who we are. But then there are other Republicans who have really echoed the president, and that includes Randy Fine. He's a Republican from Florida. He took to social media and essentially downplayed this attack, saying, I don't know what Ilhan Omar is so upset about. He also blamed the left for legitimizing political violence. And this all comes, Kristen, as threats to members of Congress are on the rise. According to the Capitol Police, just last year, they investigated nearly 15,000 concerning statements against members of Congress, their staff, or their family members. And that's a nearly 40% increase from the previous year. It's also a record high since they even started tracking these numbers. But it all comes as the Capitol Police force is already understaffed and overworked. So that's been an ongoing problem here on Capitol Hill, Kristen.
Just staggering numbers to see in print. Melanie Zanona, thank you so much for your great reporting, as always, from Capitol Hill. We really appreciate it. Coming up, the top Democrat on the Senate Homeland Security Committee joins us as Democrats threaten to partially shut down the government over an effort to reform ICE, as Mel was just talking about. But first, breaking news. The Federal Reserve says it is keeping interest rates unchanged, despite mounting political pressure from the White House. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. It's the first interest rate decision of the year. The Federal Reserve voted to keep interest rates steady. The central bank announcing this afternoon it would keep the federal funds rate at 3.5 to 3.75%. The vote was not unanimous. Two governors, both Trump appointees, favored rate cuts. The decision coming amid unprecedented pressure on the Fed, with Chair Jerome Powell revealing just weeks ago that he was the target of a federal criminal investigation, which he says is a result of his unwillingness to bend to the president's rate cut demands. Powell was asked multiple times about that investigation and declined to speak further about it. NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans joins me now. Thanks so much for being here. Great to have you here, Christine, in person. So any surprises today?
I don't think there were any big surprises. The Fed deciding not to cut interest rates. We had expected that because the Fed's it's kind of in this position where the economy is growing, firm footing, the Fed chief told us, heading into 2026. There still is inflation that is somewhat elevated, the Fed chief said, and a job market that softened last year but is stabilizing, he said. But I asked him about inflation because, when I look at the consumer sentiment readings, sure, the stock market's at record highs. Sure, people have all this money in their home equity, but people say they feel pretty lousy about the cost of living. And he acknowledged that there is a squeeze for part of the electorate.
We have a vast network through the reserve banks and also through the Board of Governors where we talk to small and large businesses and households. And so we do hear a lot about affordability, and we take that very seriously, and we take it to heart because one of our jobs is price stability. And so, the best thing we can do for people who are feeling that squeeze is to keep inflation under control and, frankly, to finish the job of getting inflation back down to 2%.
Yeah, finish the job. He's not saying like the president who says, it's solved, I solved it, it's defeated. He's saying there's still work to do there.
Yeah, still more work ahead, and it does come against this extraordinary backdrop. He says the DOJ is investigating him. He was asked multiple times about this, declined to specifically weigh in, but he was not without some interesting comments.
Yeah.
What stood out to you?
Look, we all tried to get more from him on just where they stand in this epic fight between the White House and the Fed and its independence. He was asked what his advice is for the next person who's named Fed chief, because his term is up in May. And he was so interesting how he said, I would say avoid politics. You report to Congress. Whoever takes this job, your boss is Congress. That's where the oversight comes from, and the American people are your customer, your client. Those are my words. And he said, just make sure that you do the job. And he said, the people in this building, this independent Fed, the envy of the world, essentially the smartest people you'll ever work with are the people who work there at the Fed. And he seemed very proud about that position and setting it apart from the executive branch and these criticisms from the president.
And he's someone who has so firmly talked about the importance of the independence of the Fed. Fascinating to hear that. Let me ask you, because Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was on CNBC this morning. I want to play you a little bit of what he said and get your reaction.
I do think that there are many members on the board who had a false narrative on inflation, and I hope that they will have an open mind and see what's coming over the next couple of months.
What do you think that means, false narrative on inflation?
He is saying that President Trump's policies are going to create a non-inflationary boom. He says, and has said many times, that inflation is way lower than the official statistics are showing, and that the Fed has spent too much time dithering about worrying about inflation and should, as the president wants, cut rates, cut rates, cut rates. That is not the view from the Federal Reserve. They still feel, those policymakers, most of them, are very concerned that inflation could come roaring back because the economy is so strong. And that is a recent scar for many people. And if you look at the opinion polls and consumer sentiment surveys, it is making the money last the month is still a real problem for a lot of families. So inflation is still front of mind for them.
All right. Kristi Noem, it's always so great to have you here in D.C. with us. Thank you so much. Great to see you. Coming up after the break, Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the hot seat, testifying on Capitol Hill for the first time since the U.S. capture of Venezuela's leader. Stay with us right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio testified on Capitol Hill today for the first time since the U.S. capture and arrest of Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro nearly 4 weeks ago, saying that, quote, good and decent progress has been made in recent weeks. In his prepared remarks, which he did not read during the hearing, Secretary Rubio wrote the administration is, quote, prepared to use force to ensure maximum cooperation by the interim government in Venezuela. But when pressed by senators, he appeared to walk back that threat.
The president never rules out his options as commander-in-chief to protect the national interest of the United States. I can tell you right now with full certainty, we are not postured to, nor do we intend or expect to have to take any military action in Venezuela at any time. The only military presence you'll see in Venezuela is our Marine Guards at an embassy. Okay, that is our goal. That is our expectation.
Joining me now is NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and Chief Washington Correspondent Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, thanks so much for being here. What were your key takeaways? This was significant that he was on the Hill for the first time this year.
He was on the Hill for the first time not only this year, but not since last spring has he testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He is the Secretary of State, of course, and the National Security Advisor. He's been very busy. He's also the head of the National Archives. But the fact is that he has not been that accessible to his former colleagues. They are, of course, giving him a lot of running room because he is someone that they've known for 15 years, and among the national security team, he is clearly the one that they know best and that they rely on the most. Look, on Venezuela, he is clearly slow walking it, saying that they're willing to, it's going to take a while, they're willing to see how this goes. He defended Darcy Rodriguez the new president, the former vice president from, of course, the Maduro regime, when asked, didn't she have a connection to narcotics also? She was part of that regime, and she was known to have those connections, and he kind of glossed over that. So they're willing to give Venezuela a lot of running room. And he was skirting around detailed questions from Senator Shaheen and others about the money, the $500 million supposedly from the first oil sale, that several hundred million are deposited in an account in Qatar. And he was questioned about how that is being accounted for, and that was a little bit murky as well.
Even as the president saying that the U.S. could be there for years.
And Rubio, by the way, also met with the opposition leader, the Nobel laureate Maria Machado, this afternoon, and she was very diplomatic about when or if the opposition would ever get any kind of recognition, because clearly this Maduro, post-Maduro regime, the successors to Maduro are still very much in charge.
Yeah, and very much in alliance with Maduro. Let me ask you about another big topic that came up today. NATO, of course, a lot of concerns about NATO in the wake of President Trump threatening to take Greenland. I want to play what Secretary Rubio said and get your reaction on the other side.
Do you still believe that the U.S. benefits from NATO?
We do. I mean, the problem but NATO needs to be reimagined as well in terms of the obligations.
When we antagonize our allies and partners, and when we send Canada to do a trade deal with China instead of coming to New Hampshire or the United States, it weakens our ability to confront our adversaries.
Yeah, but our allies have to be two things. They have to be willing to step up, but they also have to be capable of stepping up. And frankly, many of them have not.
How are European allies going to watch that exchange?
Not happy. I mean, this was hardly a ringing endorsement of NATO, and coming after Davos and after his emphasis on the Western Hemisphere, it's not what they want to hear heading in 2 weeks to the Munich Security Summit.
Which I know you'll be watching closely. And there was also some news on Iran.
More news on Iran, actually. Threats from the president. The Armada is on the way. We know that the Abraham Lincoln, the carrier, is in the region, and saying that it is a bigger fleet than the fleet that was arrayed against Venezuela. Rubio saying that the U.S. is prepared to retaliate and to preempt any kind of Iranian strike against thousands of U.S. troops in the region. We have more aircraft as well on bases. But the Saudis have said, and the UAE have said, that they do not want to see a U.S. strike against Iran. Rubio testified that there are intelligence assessments, and I've confirmed that there are intelligence assessments that the regime is weaker than it has been. That's what the president's being told, weaker than it has been at any time since 1979, the revolution, but that there still is no strong opposition, and they don't see a crack in the regime.
Well, it's a region you and we continue to watch very closely. Andrea, thank you for covering all those angles for us. Great to see you, as always. Coming up next, one of the few Democratic senators who voted to confirm Secretary Kristi Noem as the DHS secretary responds to the growing calls for Noem to resign over her handling of ICE operations in Minneapolis. Plus, breaking news in Georgia, the FBI serving a search warrant today at the Fulton County Election Center, looking for records related to the 2020 elections. We have the details straight ahead right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Congress appears headed toward a partial government shutdown at the end of this week, with Senate Democrats united in their opposition to a Homeland Security funding bill they say does not do enough to rein in ICE. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans are resisting efforts to separate that bill from the larger appropriations package before Friday's funding deadline. Joining me now is Democratic Senator from Michigan, Gary Peters. He is the ranking member on the Homeland Security Committee. Senator Peters, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, good to be with you. Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you. So let's start right there. After this weekend's killing of Alex Preddy, you announced that you would be voting no on this DHS funding bill. So just walk me through the timeline for you. Were you always a no, or was it this incident that happened on Saturday that pushed you to be a no?
Well, I certainly had reservations from the get-go on the DHS bill. I believe very strongly that we need to have guardrails in terms of activities that ICE and other DHS folks are engaged in when it comes to being on the street. Certainly, we had incidents that have been incredibly troubling And then with Alex's murder in the streets of Minneapolis on Saturday, it became clear that we need to have guidelines. Certainly, we have to basically ensure that federal agents are basically have the kind of accountability that we expect of our local police force. The kind of actions that we all witnessed, we all watched it on video, and I think all Americans who watched that were troubled and outraged by it. That's simply unacceptable in this country, and we can't continue along that path. We need to put in some meaningful reforms, and now's the time to get Republicans to join us in what should be just the right thing to do.
I want to get your reaction to something that Senator Murray said, now not supporting the legislation, but this was last week. Quote, ICE must be reined in, and unfortunately, neither a CR nor a shutdown would do anything to restrain it because thanks to Republicans, ICE is now sitting on a massive slush fund it can tap whether or not we pass a funding bill. Weigh in on that. Will partially shutting down the government actually achieve what you've just laid out?
Well, a couple things. First off, we've got to make sure that we're not shutting down other elements of government that we all agree need to be funded. As you know, there are 5 bills, important bills for labor and health and for the Department of Defense. We all agree on that. That's 95% of federal spending. Those are bipartisan bills. I serve not only as the ranking member on Homeland Security, I'm on the Appropriations Committee. We've worked in a bipartisan way. We need to pass those bills. The House separated them. They just voted on those bills. We can do that in the Senate as well. So far, Leader Thune is not allowing that. And let's, we got to remember the Republicans control the Senate, and this is just a procedural move. What procedure do you use to put votes on the floor? It's very clear we can just vote on the bills we all agree on and accomplish that. And then I'm going to appeal to my Republican colleagues is that let's work on these reforms. I would hope, and I know I've heard from several of them, some of them have gone public, that they too were outraged by what they saw and were incredibly troubled by what they saw on the streets of Minneapolis. So we have to appeal to that. Let's focus on that issue. It's certainly what the American people expect us to do right now. But we're going to need a little time to work through those kinds of reforms. But let's not hold up the rest of government while we work up on reforms that I hope we all agree. And if the Republicans don't, if they insist on just pushing all of these bills together, the shutdown is clearly on them. This is just a procedural issue. There's no disagreement on 5 of those bills that fund 95% of government or more. It's just they have a procedure that don't allow us to do that. So, I'm hopeful. I've talked to a number of my colleagues. We're not there yet, but I hope that saner heads will prevail in the end.
And just to be very clear, do you have any actual buy-in from your Republican colleagues at this point as we're having this conversation? Do you think that we are headed for a partial shutdown?
Well, certainly, I can tell you that all of my colleagues on the Democratic side, we're not going to be voting for this motion to proceed, which is going to happen tomorrow. There's not going to be I don't believe there'll be any Democratic votes, perhaps a couple, but it's going to be overwhelming response from Democrats, and we're not going to go forward. And it's just unfortunate because we know we could move all the other appropriation bills. But I have, to your question, I've had conversations with Republican colleagues. Many of them are troubled. It takes time, I think, to work through this. And the kinds of reforms that I'm looking at and my colleagues are looking at are basically just common sense reforms. And if I could encapsulate it, it basically says when ICE and other federal agents are engaged in these activities in our communities, they should abide by the same rules that our local law enforcement abide by. When it comes to body cameras and to make sure they get a judicial warrant before they pound down doors of people and invade their personal space, you need to have a warrant for that, and to make sure you have proper training. And if an officer does something that goes horribly wrong, there needs to be an independent investigation of that. It can't be within that particular department. States have that. In my home state of Michigan, for example, the policy is if there's a shooting, that is investigated. And it's not the local department that investigates it. It's the Michigan State Police. We need to have that kind of independence when it comes to the federal government.
Senator, I want to ask you about the leadership that you're seeing right now, and Secretary Noem in particular. You were one of 7 Democrats, actually, who voted to confirm her as Homeland Security Secretary. Do you regret your vote to confirm Secretary Noem?
There's no question. I'm incredibly disappointed by what we've seen in actions. I'm ranking member of Homeland Security. I want to have an opportunity to talk to the Secretary. It's important for me to do my job. But if you look at her actions recently, they are impossible to defend. I think she has done a very bad job. But I don't want to focus just on that, because I think if she gets replaced by somebody else, they're also going to do a bad job, especially when you got folks like Stephen Miller and others basically calling the shots. And that's why we need to have meaningful reforms. We have to put in guardrails into the legislation. This has to be in law, so a future Secretary of Homeland Security isn't able to freelance and do horrible things that are terrible and are not what the American people want to see from their Department of Homeland Security. Let's focus on keeping us safe from dangerous individuals, but let's not terrorize people on the streets, and certainly let's not kill American citizens on the street.
And Senator, I understand it's a bigger picture, but just staying on this question of Secretary Noem, as you know, a number of your colleagues are calling for her to resign. There are lawmakers in the House who are saying they want to impeach. Do you think she should step down?
Well, I think she should ask, as far as resigning, she has to ask the question, can she effectively lead this agency? And based on her performance as of late, I think she should come to the conclusion that she can't. She should move on. But again, let's focus on what we really need to do. I don't know who's going to replace her, but that person will also likely be very bad. And that's why we need to make sure we're changing the rules, the procedures, and the law so that we can have proper guardrails for the Department of Homeland Security, whoever takes that position in the future.
All right. Senator Peters, thank you so much for your time and perspective today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We do want to turn now to some breaking news out of Georgia, where the FBI is conducting what it calls court-authorized activity at the Fulton County Election Office. County officials say that activity involved serving a search warrant seeking a number of records related to the 2020 election. Fulton County has been a focus of President Trump's false claims about election interference in 2020. The president referencing those baseless allegations last week in Davos.
It was a rigged election. Everybody now knows that. They found out. People will soon be prosecuted for what they did.
Important to note, of course, the 2020 election was not rigged, as the president just said. NBC News senior justice reporter Ryan Riley joins me now. Ryan, what are you learning about the focus of this FBI activity in Fulton County?
Yeah, so under FBI protocols, what they're allowed to do is confirm when there's law enforcement activity at a place. And in this instance, they've said that this was court-authorized law enforcement activity. But what we know from the county itself is that this was a search warrant that involved the 2020 election. And so obviously that's something, as you noted there, that Donald Trump has had a long focus on. And he's really been pressuring the Justice Department to bring forward some sort of action on. But there's a number of reasons, including the fact that the 2020 election was not, in fact, rigged, that really create a burden, I think, for the people who are being pressured by Donald Trump to move forward. But this is a major step forward, potentially into a future investigation, though we don't know where exactly this is going to land.
And what are state and local officials saying about these developments?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were surprised by it. And this, as of this afternoon, this was still an ongoing search. And so all they sort of said was that this was about the 2020 election. But we've had a number of measures from the Justice Department to attempt to, get these records before. There had been sort of separate court battles involving the Civil Rights Division to sort of get records from Fulton County. And so, this really feeds into this longstanding grievance that Donald Trump has had.
And now that it's been 5 years since the 2020 election, is it possible that statute of limitations could preclude any charges related to what happened in that election?
Yeah, that's precisely the big question here, because that 5-year statute of limitations is up. And so in order to charge any crime, they would have to find that there was some sort of criminal conspiracy in which there was some sort of action as part of that criminal conspiracy that took place within the past 5 years. And so, right now, as of, January 28th of 2026, that 5-year statute of limitation goes back to 2021, to late January of 2021. And so they have to find that there was some sort of criminal conspiracy and that there were actions taken during that time. And that's at a point where, of course, Joe Biden's already back or is already in the White House. That's not a scenario where the election was still sort of up for debate. So it's a little bit of a trick if they actually want to bring forward any criminal charges to try just to get past that preliminary review, given the statute of limitations.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on the Breaking News. We really appreciate it. Still to come, President Trump hits the road to tout his administration's economic agenda. But will his message break through in the aftermath of those back-to-back fatal shootings in Minneapolis? The panel's next. This is Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. This week was meant to be President Trump's big pivot to the economy and unofficial kickoff to the midterms. And while he did give a mostly economic-focused speech in Iowa, that message has been largely overshadowed by the fallout from the deaths of 2 American citizens at the hands of federal agents in Minnesota and the backlash to the president's immigration agenda. Joining me now is our panel, Nicholas Wu, congressional reporter for Politico, Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden, and Stephen Hayes, editor and CEO of The Dispatch and an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you for being here. Really appreciate it. Nicholas, let me start with you and what President Trump has said needs to be a little bit of a de-escalation. What are you seeing and what do you make of this moment?
Well, what we're seeing the collision of right now is all these different factors with the government funding fight that's happening in Congress. We have a crucial deadline on Friday where funding for a good chunk of the federal government is set to lapse. And a very carefully crafted deal is about to really fall apart in the Senate right now because there's been such a backlash among Democrats to the idea of funding DHS after these shootings in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and Stephen, it does come as the president was going to make this pivot to the economy, but everything has been overshadowed by this moment, what quite frankly feels like a pivotal moment in Minneapolis and in the president's deportation operation.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big moment for the country, honestly.
Yeah.
It's not just the horror that we saw in Minneapolis over the weekend. Remember, this comes on the heels of the president speaking openly about the possibility of the United States invading a NATO ally to take territory that is not, I mean, that's on top of the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. That's on top of discussions of Iran strike and strikes in Nigeria and strikes in Syria. I mean, this is just a huge moment, and I think people in the country get the sense that this is out of control and that the president isn't focused on the things that they, in some ways, elected him to focus on. Now, some of his base, of course, voted for him for this kind of retribution for some of the stuff that we're seeing on immigration, but a lot of people voted for him because they wanted their prices to come down, because that's what he said, and that's how he ran against Joe Biden.
Yeah, well, and Megan, one of the aspects looming so large over all of this is the initial response that we saw from top administration officials, including Secretary Kristi Noem, who came out and referred to Mr. Preddy as a domestic terrorist. I want to play a little bit of what Tricia McLaughlin had to say in response to questions about her initial response.
Secretary Noem accused Alex Preddy of being a domestic terrorist. Is the administration standing by that language?
So initial statements were made after reports from CBP on the ground. That was a very chaotic scene. We know that our ICE law enforcement are facing rampant violence against them, a highly coordinated campaign. So that is why this investigation is so important, so that we can get accurate facts to the American people.
So, Megan, despite that, you still heard Senator Peters say, yeah, he thinks actually it's time for Secretary Noem to go, which I thought was striking.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In the last 24 to 48 hours, you've really seen the blame game really take shape here. You've seen Noem blame Stephen Miller and the president. You've seen Stephen Miller blame CPB, that the information wasn't accurate. All that this is creating is just more chaos. And to your point, the American people are tired of it. They don't want to wake up and hear about taking over Greenland. They don't want to wake up and see that someone's being shot in our streets. They literally just want their grocery prices to come down. They want to be able to get their kids to school and pay for groceries and pay for their electricity, which they cannot do right now.
Yeah, Stephen, what did you make of what we heard from Tricia? And that seems to be the line that we're hearing from DHS. And as Megan rightfully points out, the blame game is in full swing right now.
Well, let's be really blunt about it. There's very little reason to believe this man from Tricia McLaughlin because she lies a lot. And what she's doing here is lying in defense of the lies that we saw from the administration officials. It wasn't a massacre. They had no idea that Alex Preddy wanted to come and kill ICE agents. I mean, one lie after another after another. That's what she's doing here. And the thing that I think is disturbing is that they're often lying when the reality is contradicted by the things that we can all see. And I don't think they're lying because they hope to persuade people who have seen the video or people who might have just heard about the video. They're lying to give their base something to say. And I think that's dangerous.
Nicholas, one of the aspects of this moment is the video that everyone has seen that is so difficult to watch. And there are so many different angles that people spent the weekend reviewing, quite frankly, and that posed a real problem when those initial statements came out. This is a president who understands television. He understands the power of optics. How do you think these visuals are playing into this shift that we're seeing with him?
It's really a reflection of the moment we are in now in 2026, where smartphones are ubiquitous, and all these videos were on social media almost immediately afterwards. And so, in many ways, that served to contradict this initial narrative that came out of the administration. I think that's why we're seeing such a turn of opinion in some ways after this particular shooting, and then in politically too.
Yeah, Nicholas, I want to go back to a point that you made, which is about the potential partial government shutdown that's looming over all of this. What did you make of what you heard from Senator Peters in terms of it shining light on whether or not there might be a breakthrough? Did you get the sense that there could be one by Friday?
Right now, it doesn't seem like there will be. The Senate's going to take basically a key test vote tomorrow. It doesn't look like it'll succeed. Yeah. And so, it's a question of where things go from there. Like, some Republican senators are talking about stripping out the DHS funding bill from this whole funding package, but that means it would have to go back to the House. And there's no guarantee that a standalone DHS funding bill could even pass the House right now. Yeah. So, this leaves us in a very bad place.
Megan, politically speaking, how are Democrats viewing this? We know that in the last government shutdown, polls did show that most of the blame went to Republicans. And yet here you have Democrats threatening to effectively shut down the government for a second time. Could it backfire?
I mean, I think it always could backfire when you choose to shut down the government without a way to reopen it. But I do think that the Democrats have to stand for something here, and they have to really push back on the funding for DHS and ICE specifically. But my question is, Schumer came out and demanded all these things, that ICE do all these reforms, but they aren't following the law anyway. So why are they going to follow these reforms that you're asking? They're going to take their money and they're going to move on, and we're going to be back in the same situation, criticizing them for wearing masks and not having warrants and not following the law or the Constitution. So I just don't understand where we're coming, how we're going to get out of this moment.
Stephen, do you see a way out of this moment?
No, probably not. I mean, I do think Republicans are feeling the heat in a way that they haven't before. There is a sense that this is this big moment and that things have spun really out of control. And you're having people, who don't normally talk about politics, like Victor Wembanyama, the NBA star, and Dave Matthews. People are sort of weighing in because they think things are out of control. And I think Republicans are listening to that.
Yeah, I want to play a little bit of what President Trump had to say last night, because, of course, the backdrop to all of this is the midterm elections. He clearly has his eye on that. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
What will happen if Democrats take the House?
They'll probably try and impeach me. They'll say he went to Iowa and he spoke unfairly to people, and he's not supposed to do that. Let's impeach him, okay?
Nicholas, what do you make of those comments by the president? This is not the first time that he's predicted that if Democrats were to win back the House, that he would be impeached. I have to say, I've interviewed a lot of Democrats, and they don't jump immediately to impeachment, though no one's closing the door on that either.
I mean, this has very much been a long-time fixation of the president, and there was some reporting that his fears of impeachment were what even drove the nationwide redistricting push by him and his allies. But to your point about Democrats, pretty much almost every Democratic lawmaker I've talked to, really doesn't want to touch impeaching President Trump. But that is in part why we see so much talk right now of impeaching Kristi Noem or other cabinet officials instead. That's a much safer political target for Democrats.
Weigh in on this, Stephen. Do you think that this concern about impeachment is justified? I mean, he has been impeached twice in the past, so it stands to reason that he would jump to that conclusion. But what do you make of his sort of fixation on it right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's right, just in terms of where the Democrats' heads are. I think if Democrats did take the House, they would try to impeach him. They'd probably try to impeach him several times. But I think Nicholas is right, too. They don't want to talk about it. So they want to do it, but they don't want to talk about it much because they don't think it's very good. And if there's one thing that Republicans, that the president can do to rally his Republican base, it's to play the martyr. We saw him do this very effectively in the 2024 presidential campaign, where he said, they're coming after me, and they're not really just coming after me, they're coming after me, and they're coming after you. And I think he could play that to good effect if Democrats spoke about it more openly.
Megyn, how do you see this impeachment discussion? Do you think that Democrats should stay away from it and stay focused on what you were talking about, affordability?
Absolutely. It does no good to impeach him. He's still going to be the president until 2029. So they should focus on solutions for making things more affordable if they have any hope of winning the White House in 28, let alone the midterms. I mean, I think that that's looking more favorable, but the president needs to get out of Washington and get out of his inner circle to really touch grass, because he is following a long, it's going every day. It gets more disastrous of how many seats we're going to take in the midterms.
All right. Thank you all for being here on a very busy news day. Really appreciate it. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. And as always, you can catch up on full episodes of Meet the Press and Meet the Press Now with the Meet the Press podcast. Just scan the QR code and listen now wherever you get your podcasts. There is much more news ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.